There have been positive developments, including the appointment of an SDF-nominated Assistant Minister of Defense, the release of detainees from both sides, and the beginning of returns to the city of Ain al-Arab, Kobani, and other areas. At the same time, key questions remain under discussion, including the modalities of the integration of SDF forces into the Syrian army and police, the future role of the women's protection units, the incorporation of civil employees into state institutions, and Kurdish language education. Mr. President, we have seen renewed calls by Daesh for violence and an increase in attacks against Syrian government forces in Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and other areas. While small-scale and geographically dispersed, these attacks underscore Daesh's intent to rebuild, and I welcome renewed vigilance and countermeasures by Syrian forces and the rest of the US-led global coalition. Separately, Al-Hol camp is now closed. Most inhabitants, mainly women and children, including Syrians and third country nationals, fled and have reportedly dispersed throughout Aleppo, Deir ez-Zor, and Idlib. Some may have even left Syria. As you know, a number of those who have been in the camp were suspected of being associated with or had family ties to Daesh. Those who remained were transferred to Burhan camp in Aleppo, where UNHCR has registered 731 families. In Al-Roj camp, where over 2,000 third country nationals, as well as some Syrians, are held, remains under SDF control. In addition to security concerns, the developments related to Al-Hol gave rise to significant protection and integration challenges. Meeting them is also important if the risk of radicalization is to be stemmed. The UN supports efforts for the reintegration of Syrians within Syria, conducted in a manner that promotes social cohesion and the security of all. We also urge the speedy repatriation of third country nationals in a manner consistent with human rights standards. Mr. President, let me now turn to the Council attention to economic recovery, which is key to Syria's political stabilization. After more than a decade of conflict and isolation and a year of transition, Syria's economy remains extremely fragile. Regrettably, the regional conflict has forced the Syrian authorities to reduce electricity supply, and cross-border trade has also been negatively impacted. This, of course, comes at the wrong time for Syria, which is trying to turn the corner and move into recovery. An International Monetary Fund delegation who visited Damascus in February reported early indications that economic activity may be improving, supported by increasing electricity provision, the return of refugees, increasing investment, and Syria's gradual reintegration into regional economic networks. It is also notable that the Syrian Central Bank recently reactivated its account at the Federal Reserve in New York. However, as the central bank governor told me in Damascus, the slow pace of Syria's reintegration in the financial system, in the international financial system, is a threat to Syria's recovery and stability. Despite the lifting of most sectoral sanctions, Syrians have yet to feel the benefits. There is a need for continuing easing of remaining restrictions and export controls, alongside efforts to address the legacy of sanctions, particularly financial overcompliance. And support from public and private partners is also essential. Mr. President, our office continues in coordination with international partners to support an inclusive Syrian-led political transition and institutional processes required to sustain it. I appreciate my discussion with Foreign Minister Shabani on this matter. We are now actively discussing areas of cooperation between the office and the Syrian government. And I hope to report to the Council soon that we have reached an understanding and also that the mission can relocate to Damascus. Meanwhile, our office continues to engage regularly with Syrian officials and Syrian civil society, whose meaningful participation and ability to operate freely is vital to an inclusive political transition. In my discussions in Damascus, Syrian women in particular stressed that women's participation in emerging institutions remains below legitimate expectations. And I welcome here, though, the recent recruitment of women into the Ministry of Interior, including those who defected from Assad's era security institutions. And I very much look forward to listening to Yusra Mardini shortly with her vision for a Syria where everyone feels safe and at home. Mr. President, let me conclude by recalling my starting point. Syria's steady but fragile recovery, political, institutional, and economic, could be undermined by the impact of a prolonged regional conflict. Let us redouble efforts to support Syria in shielding itself from this conflict. And let us refocus on helping Syria continue and even accelerate its path towards recovery, reconstruction, and stability. The success of Syria's transition will depend on the ability of Syrians themselves to shape a future grounded in sovereignty, accountability, and inclusion. Thank you.
Mr. Cardone, thank you for that insightful and thorough presentation, as well as the great job that you and your team do every day. We're all greatly appreciative and fortunate to have the poster person of the new adventure in great female womanhood in Syria and the world, Yusra Mardini. And Yusra, thank you for everything you've done and your courage in being here today. Thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Mr. President. The repercussions of the war in the Middle East are reverberating across the region. For Syria, this escalation adds new strain at a fragile moment, one that still offers a genuine opportunity for progress. As Deputy Special Envoy Cardone has just set out, Syria is already experiencing the effects of the military escalation in the region. Falling debris from aerial projectiles have killed or injured several people and damaged property. Over 140,000 people have fled from Lebanon to Syria, most of them Syrian nationals. The escalation precipitated some planned returns for about 30% of those now arriving in Syria. They are joining the 1.5 million refugees who have returned from neighboring countries since December 2024. Some have indicated plans to return to Lebanon when the situation stabilizes. Mr. President, despite airspace restrictions, the closure of Damascus airport and heightened security risks, our operations continue. In northern and eastern Syria, the situation has stabilized in recent weeks, but significant needs remain. Many of those displaced during January have returned home, but over 100,000 people remain displaced in Aleppo and Al-Hasakeh governorates. Services are gradually coming back online, but irregular electricity supply continues to disrupt water stations, hospitals, and water systems, affecting hundreds of thousands of people. People's mobility is improving. Key roads connecting Al-Hasakeh with Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Damascus have reopened, and a stretch of the M4 highway has reopened for the first time since 2019. Our humanitarian partners are assisting over 200,000 people a month in areas of return with food, healthcare, water, and household items. But humanitarian aid is no substitute for state-led services. The situation in Ain al-Arab, also known as Kobani, has gradually improved since our last briefing, but humanitarian needs remain significant. Electricity has been partially restored, but gaps persist. Markets are functioning, but there are shortages or high prices for fuel, food, medical supplies, and other goods. Following the closure of Al-Hol camp in late February and the departure of its residents, UNHCR and its partners are supporting around 3,000 women and children who were relocated to the transit camp of Ak-Burhan in Aleppo Governorate. The UN and our partners are also following up with people who have arrived from Al-Hol in other areas, including Deir ez-Zor, Homs, and Idlib, to facilitate their access to services. And we are assisting families who have returned to Afrin in Aleppo Governorate from Al-Hasakah with government support. Meanwhile, the presence of landmines, unexploded ordnance, and other explosive remnants of war continue to take a devastating toll across Syria. Since OCHA's last briefing to this council on 13 February, 50 people were reportedly killed and 97 injured in Syria due to explosive ordnance-related incidents. Mine action organizations stand ready to expand operations, working closely with Syrian authorities, but they also need sufficient resources and continued security. Mr. President, as we have consistently told this council, Syria has an important opportunity to move towards economic recovery, to gradually reduce humanitarian needs, and to lessen reliance on large-scale humanitarian assistance. But this opportunity remains fragile and will require sustained international support, particularly in the face of the regional volatility. I have three asks for this council today. First, we need sustained diplomatic engagement to resolve remaining flashpoints and ensure the stability required for people to return home and recovery to take hold. This includes consolidating security improvements in areas like northeast Syria, where recent violence has added to existing needs. But it also includes addressing the current regional escalation. The longer hostilities persist in the region, the greater the risks for Syria and its people. Beyond the danger of direct military spillover, the prolonged disruption to shipping routes, coupled with the rising prices of fuel, fertilizer, and other essential goods, could deal a serious blow to Syria's already fragile economy, just as it begins to recover and reconnect with the world after years of conflict and isolation. As always, the most vulnerable people would be the first and hardest hit, threatening the tentative but real improvements we have seen across some humanitarian indicators. The risk of disruptions to humanitarian operations would also grow, bringing delays and higher costs for humanitarian operations at a time when efficiency is key to overcoming underfunding. Second, we need to sustain critical humanitarian aid in the near term as development and recovery efforts take hold. We continue to deliver aid as efficiently as we can with the resources available. We assisted 40% more people in 2025 than we did the year before, as our access has improved and our operations have been streamlined. But our appeal for Syria received only about a third of the $3.2 billion required, meaning many more people went without vital support. Humanitarian response also remains constrained by liquidity challenges and a lack of banking and other services in many parts of the country. We continue to prioritize the emergency response to those affected by recent insecurity in the northeast, as I described earlier, and in southern Syria. At the same time, we undertake activities that can also help advance recovery. UNICEF and other partners are helping repair water infrastructure, like a treatment facility in Deir ez-Zor that will provide clean water for 400,000 people. The World Health Organization is working with the Ministry of Health to strengthen primary health services and medical supplies for hospitals. UN agencies and our partners are also rehabilitating schools and bakeries and supporting the clearance of explosive ordnance. I want to thank the member states that have already contributed to this year's humanitarian response. But without more funding, we could see further reductions in critical assistance like water and sanitation in displacement sites, support to health facilities, and emergency food support and bread subsidies. Humanitarian support remains critical to ensuring that returns are sustainable, that more people are able to make informed and voluntary decisions about their future, and those who remain displaced get adequate support. Third, we also need to see substantial and sustained investment in Syria's recovery and development. As the Deputy Special Envoy said, we continue to see steady progress in this regard, including the reopening this month of the Syrian Central Bank's account with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. But events in the wider region are diverting international attention and could put new constraints on the ability to mobilize resources. We need to do all we can to ensure continued momentum for economic investments, targeted development finance, and support for services that can reach the most vulnerable people in Syria. Mr. President, Syria continues to present a rare and genuine opportunity to begin reversing a humanitarian emergency of historical magnitude. But that opportunity remains fragile, and sustaining it will require continued international attention and support. The ongoing crisis in the region is introducing another set of challenges for Syria to navigate. It will be a tragic mistake if our support to the people of Syria lost momentum now. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Msuya for the thorough presentation. I now give the floor to Ms. Yusra Mardini.
Good morning, Mr. President, Excellencies. I've addressed many world leaders before, but have never spoken with more urgency than I do today. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Council. My name is Yusra Mardini. I'm a refugee, Olympic swimmer, UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, and advocate. But most of all, I'm a proud Syrian who loves my country and wants to see it reach its full potential. I stand before you as a child of war, carrying not only my own memories, but the weight of countless untold stories. These memories do not fade. They remain quietly stored in the deepest parts of the mind and soul. I was 17 when I fled. Half the children in Syria today have never known a single day of peace. Belonging is something many spend a lifetime searching for. Now imagine what it means for those who are forced to leave everything behind: their homes, their families, their sense of self. I have lived that reality. I spent half of my life in Syria and the other half in Germany. Yet the question of where I belong has never had a simple answer. Last March, I returned to Syria for the first time in 10 years, through my role as a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. The feeling of going back was overwhelming, familiar, emotional, and at moments, deeply disorienting. Because alongside that sense of return came something else, a quiet, persistent feeling of being an outsider in a place that is still my home. I looked around and saw people returning, not to rebuilt houses, but to rubble, to fragments of what once was. Despite efforts of humanitarian organizations like UNHCR that are providing assistance and helping people repair homes, the needs in Syria are overwhelming, and there are not enough resources. I spoke to Syrians that still live there and asked a simple question: are you happy? More than not, the response was silence. Not because they had no answer, but because, one, survival, rising costs of living, and the enduring weight of trauma consumes every waking hour. Happiness is a luxury. Happiness is a luxury question that belongs to another life. Silence, Mr. President, is not an answer. It is a verdict on what the world has allowed. And this is the reality that must not be overlooked. Beyond the headlines and the political calculations are millions of lives shaped by displacement, loss, and resilience. A generation that has grown up knowing war more intimately than peace. A people who continue to endure even when the world's attention becomes strained by multiple crises. Resilience is not just a word I use. It is the lived story of every Syrian I have met. Syria is facing an unprecedented moment in its history. It has finally emerged after 14 years of brutal dictatorship. But it is deeply broken. 90% of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance, while hundreds of thousands of refugees returning from neighboring countries face enormous challenges. Yet what defines us as Syrians is our resilience. Even in the face of many challenges, we never give up. We cannot rebuild Syria alone. It requires collective effort from the international community, the Syrian government, and the Syrian people themselves. Today, I want to speak plainly about what Syria needs from this council. First, I want to empathize that Syria requires years of recovery. And when I speak of recovery, I mean a process that is inclusive, unified, and just. I'm not only talking of physical recovery. Syria also requires reconciliation and societal recovery, a future when no religious sect divides us, and where no one group is favored over another. We must break down the walls of division, not only build new ones. The atrocities committed throughout various parts of Syria in recent months and years must be investigated and perpetrators held accountable. It is in Qam't that true justice and accountability that people can move forward. People in Syria are treated equally under the law. The Syrian government also bears the responsibility of ensuring transparent and fair investigations into the fate of detainees and prisoners. The concerns of their families, who have waited for answers for years, must be acknowledged and addressed with urgency and dignity. Second, I would like to speak about the challenges facing young people in Syria. The responsibility of the Syrian government is immense. It is not only to restore peace, but to actively reshape the future of its people, especially its children. I have spoken to young Syrians who were forced to leave school and now work on the streets to support their families. Their futures cannot be an afterthought. They must be the center of any national recovery effort. A child cannot read today, will not be able to rebuild tomorrow. The international community must provide financial support, investment, and capacity building so that Syria can once again build a world-class education system, one in which each child has the opportunity to reach their full potential. Young people are so eager to learn and to rebuild their country, but they need your help. At the same time, young people in Syria have grown up knowing only trauma and war. We cannot underestimate the psychological impact of these experiences. The international community should commit to supporting mental health programs, as well as activities such as sports and other community-based programs, which help to address the significant trauma experienced by young people. My third point relates to the humanitarian situation in Syria. The current situation is unsustainable and unacceptable. Every Syrian deserves to live with dignity, but for millions, this isn't the case. Shelter, food, and healthcare are unreachable for many. This is particularly the case for returnees and IDPs. Since 2014, around 1.5 million refugees and 1.7 million IDPs have returned, but they are often returning to nothing more than rubble. The ongoing conflict in Lebanon, which has already displaced 1 million Lebanese and seen more than 140,000 refugees return to Syria, has further strained the humanitarian sector. It is heartbreaking and shameful to see such a massive humanitarian crisis unfold right before our eyes. And yet, the political act remains absent. Syria and the Syrian government and private individuals like myself need to do more to ensure that innocent civilians caught amidst the violence receive adequate aid and that families returning to Syria receive shelter, food, and health care. Several months ago, I participated in a medical mission with the Syrian American Medical Society. I met with cancer patients who had been desperately waiting for treatment, children who required reconstructive surgeries after injuries sustained during the war, elderly who had suffered from chronic illnesses for years and were now finally receiving the care they needed. And I watched a newborn baby take its first breath after doctors brought it back to life, a true miracle right in front of my eyes. I spoke with doctors who had never stopped working throughout the entire conflict, even though the hospitals were being targeted and bombed by the former regime. This kind of courage and resilience should be an inspiration to us all. As heartbreaking as it was to hear of all the suffering of so many people, I witnessed firsthand the good that can be done if we give healthcare workers the support they need. The international community should prioritize providing support for and investment in the healthcare system. We should support the Syrian government's efforts to establish a world-class health system. I would like to end my remarks today with a message of hope. As enormous as the challenges facing Syria might be, I know firsthand how resilient and strong the Syrian people are. If giving the right support, there is no reason that Syria cannot become a nation of peace and prosperity. Imagine a future where Syrians from all religions and ethnic backgrounds once again live together in a harmony and mutual respect, where new hospitals and schools are being built, where electricity and clean water are available to all, and where no child is forced to work on the streets to support their families. But to do this, we need to set aside our own political priorities and differences, and instead focus on the needs of the Syrian people. In particular, we must listen to and support young people. They are the future, yet how often do we hear from young people? How often they are given a seat at the table or consulted by your capitals? How many young people hold positions of power in the Syrian government? I challenge you all to consider and include young people as you discuss the future of Syria and the region. Together, we can build the new Syria that its people deserve. Thank you so much.
Ms. Yusra Mardini, well done, and thank you. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. We'll start with Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ambassador Barak, thank you for your presence here today. We are honored to have you with us. Let me also thank Deputy Special Envoy Cordone and Assistant Secretary General Masuya for their briefings. And last but not least, Ms. Yusra Mardini, thank you for your powerful words here today. But most of all, thank you for your inspiration for other young people who endure war and trauma and who have to end up fleeing their country. Mr. President, this past month, the international community's attention and action has been focused on the Gulf and broader Middle East as conflict and instability have swept across the region. Regional instability is rarely confined within national borders. Syria has not been directly involved in this conflict. However, as we've heard today, it has not been spared from its consequences. So let me state clearly that Denmark reaffirms our firm commitment to Syria's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. We strongly condemn last week's Hezbollah attacks on Syrian territory, and furthermore, we urge Israel to cease its incursion in southern Syria and to respect the 1974 disengagement of forces agreement. Mr. President, as we heard from Assistant Secretary General Masuya, over the past 2 weeks, more than 100,000 Syrian refugees, along with Lebanese nationals, have fled into Syria from Lebanon. This has placed immense strain on an already stretched and fragile Syria. It also adds to the risk that the situation in Soweto destabilizes further, thereby leading to new cycles of violence. We commend the constructive dialogue and coordination between Syria and Lebanon, and the efforts of the Syrian government to accommodate those fleeing Lebanon. Both parties should continue to pursue a diplomatic path towards stability along their shared border. In the northeast, another fragile transition is ongoing. We welcome the initial progress and stress the need to continue implementing the comprehensive agreement between the Syrian transitional government and the Syrian democratic forces. We urge both parties to continue to prioritize the peaceful integration of the northeast in the political transition and to ensure the rights and protection of all civilians, including the Kurds. We remain concerned about the reports of between 15,000 to 20,000 escaped detainees with ties to Daesh from camps and prisons. We call on Syria to keep the pressure on Daesh high and for the international partners to assist in order to counter any ISIL or Daesh resurgence. Mr. President, this past week, the UN has marked the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Across this building, we've heard strong calls for the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in all political and peace processes. Today, we echo those calls for Syrian women to be included in all stages and levels of the political transition. 14 years of conflict has caused so much devastation across the country. As people begin to return home, property disputes are increasing. Women in particular face significant barriers in claiming ownership, facing discriminatory laws and entrenched social norms. Addressing such injustices must be a priority for the transitional government. To assist the Syrian transitional government in the best way possible, a relocation of the Office of the Special Envoy to Damascus would be an important step, and we note that areas of specific cooperation are being discussed. Mr. President, humanitarian needs in Syria remain immense. The Syrian transitional government's efforts to receive returnees and provide shelter and other forms of support for internally displaced is commendable. However, due to ongoing insecurity, thousands of people remain displaced, and many are likely to continue requiring humanitarian assistance as they rebuild their lives. Focusing on healthcare, as mentioned by Ms. Mardini, but also water, sanitation, and education, is essential to strengthen resilience and dignity among affected communities. This response, however, is threatened by a lack of funding. It is of critical importance that humanitarian needs in Syria continue to be addressed by all involved. Mr. President, in closing, these are indeed historical times. Today, we commemorate the 15 years anniversary of the Syrian uprising when the first protest broke out in Dara. As the last ambassador of Denmark residing in Damascus, I'm happy that Denmark has decided to reopen our embassy in Damascus later this year and to appoint an ambassador to Syria. This is a clear message of Danish engagement. Denmark remains committed to supporting efforts towards a stable, secure, inclusive, and peaceful Syria, to work with the UN and partners to support the Syrian people in rebuilding their country and their future. I thank you.
Thank you. Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we're grateful to the Deputy Special Envoy of the SG for Syria, Mr. Claudio Cordone, as well as the ASG of the SG for Humanitarian Affairs, Ms. Joyce Msuya, for their detailed information about the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. We've taken note of the statement delivered by the UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, Ms. Yusra Mardini. Mr. President, Israel and the USA's confrontation with Iran is drawing in more and more states in the region, including Syria. Syria has barely recovered from the consequences of a 14-year-long bloody civil war, and it's now once again at risk of being pulled into a military confrontation. This scenario could nullify the hard-won results of national reconciliation and recovery of state unity. Of particular concern is the tense situation on the Syria-Lebanon border, where, against the backdrop of the confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel, where the Syrian government has deployed additional units to guard the border. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to crack down on any provocations which could fan the flames of war. We note with satisfaction Damascus's and Beirut's intention to continue close coordination on border security issues. The situation is exacerbated by the ongoing Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights and other territories in southern Syria, areas which could be used as an additional platform for Israeli attacks on Hezbollah positions, which would then prompt return fire on Syrian territory. Attempts to interfere in the internal affairs of Syria on the pretext of protecting ethnic and faith-based minorities, first and foremost the Druze, are not letting up. We urge West Jerusalem to jettison their plans to weaken Syrian statehood, to withdraw their forces from Syrian territory, and to return to negotiations in good faith with Damascus. We see in a positive light progress on the implementation of the ceasefire agreement between the central authorities and the Syrian Democratic Forces, as well as the phased integration of Kurds into state institutions, including administrative and security bodies. We hope that this will have a positive impact on the restoration of intergroup trust within Syria and will facilitate a return to unity in all of Syria's regions. We'd like to also put the spotlight on the issue of Damascus handing over control over ISIL prisons and refugee camps, control being handed over to Damascus. This is in the northeast of the country. We believe that the new Syrian authorities will continue to unstintingly fulfill their obligations to combat terrorism, including FTFs, and will provide the requisite security at the aforementioned sites. Mr. President, escalation in the region is having a serious negative impact on the humanitarian situation in Syria. Israeli military operations in Lebanon have already had palpable consequences. Over 100,000 people have arrived in Syria. Clearly, these aren't voluntary movements. These are people forced to search for security. Such a rapid inflow of people poses a serious challenge for the Syrian authorities and humanitarian entities who've had to urgently mobilize resources so as to respond to the needs of these new arrivals. Ongoing military tensions in the Middle East will inevitably result in further deterioration of the humanitarian situation. Syrians, much like the people in neighboring countries, will feel the effects of this first and foremost through the rise in food prices. This is particularly disquieting because food security in Syria is already acutely difficult. Over 7 million people are acutely food insecure. We call on all parties involved to take the steps necessary for de-escalation. The consequences will be catastrophic, first and foremost as regards civilians and the most vulnerable sections of society. An additional factor that's exacerbating humanitarian needs within the kindred country of Syria are internal hotspots of instability. In the Aleppo governorate in the northeast of the country, according to OCHA figures, over 117,000 people are still unable to return to their homes following the recent military clashes. We're counting on the Syrian authorities and humanitarian bodies being able to ensure a return to normal life in these regions, as well as in Tartus, Latakia, and in the south, where there were also flashes of violence last year, as we know. We understand that the work underway in Syria is made significantly harder due to acute shortages of humanitarian financing. A silver bullet solution to all of these problems seems unlikely. Having said that, we are counting on the publication in the very near future of a new OCHA humanitarian plan will provide an additional impetus for resource mobilization and will garner the necessary support from donors. Last but not least, we deem a gradual transition from providing humanitarian assistance to sustainable recovery and development to be of utmost importance. This is all the more pertinent given ongoing problems with the health, water and electricity supply, as well as other critically important areas. Syria needs genuine partnership rooted in respect for Syria. It also needs the launch of long-term recovery programs and to attract investment into the economy. As was noted during a meeting between the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and the Syrian leader, Ahmed Bashara, on the 20th of January, Russian companies, including construction companies, stand ready to partake in the process of rebuilding the Syrian state. Mr. President, given the myriad security and economic challenges Syria faces, what remains relevant is comprehensive cooperation between Damascus and the UN on the basis of Syria's national priorities and unconditional respect for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We support the efforts of the Office of the Special Envoy of the SG on Syria. We reassert the relevance of UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and the importance of holding an inclusive political process in accordance with Syria's key principles, or the key principles of the resolution, and with due regard for the interests of all ethnic and faith groups in Syria. In conclusion, we'd like to wish Syria and the Syrian people further success as they restore their country's territorial integrity. We'd like to reassert Russia's support for their efforts on this front. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
I thank
the presidency for convening this meeting. I also thank the Deputy Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Mr. Claudio Cordone, also to Ms. Joyce Masuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Ms. Yusra Mardini for their briefings. In the same vein, I welcome the permanent representative of Syria and other delegations to this meeting. In the midst of recent events in the region, I wish to begin by reiterating two things. On the one hand, the importance of respecting Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. And on the other hand, the importance of efforts made by the transitional government towards a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political solution for the benefit of the country itself and of regional stability. Accordingly, it is essential that all parties that are currently involved in the adjacent conflict return to peaceful means. The risk of spillover into Syria is high, and this Council must support political efforts at the domestic level for the country to pursue its stabilization and to return to the regional and global stage, including multilateral mechanisms. Internal peaceful dialogue and constant diplomatic arrangements are essential at this juncture. Mr. President, on the political dimension now, my delegation hopes to see a swift continuation of the electoral process, including in areas of the south and the northeast of the country, where elections have not yet been held. At the same time, we recognize the concrete steps taken towards strengthening national institutions, including the judiciary. In this regard, we stress that to guarantee effective access to justice for victims and survivors, and to effectively consolidate a transitional justice approach, it is vital to focus on efforts to address the issue of missing persons and gender-based violence. In addition, we underscore the importance of expediting work to guarantee the effective involvement of civil society organizations as part of an inclusive process. This would represent one more step towards rebuilding the social fabric. Mr. President, turning now to the humanitarian level, although there are signs of improvement, the situation remains worrisome. For this reason, we express our thanks for the work of UN agencies and entities, as well as by humanitarian partners on the ground, which, in coordination with Syrian authorities, are guaranteeing the supply of services and humanitarian aid. We also also recognize the technical support provided by the UN and partners to reconstruction and institutional strengthening efforts. We recognize that the situation in Syria continues to pose considerable challenges in terms of political stability and guaranteeing the population's human rights. However, we do see positive signs of readiness on the part of the Syrian transitional government to pursuing structural and lasting solutions. In this context, we urge the authorities to continue developing, consolidating, and expanding assistance pathways aimed not only at providing assistance, but also reintegrating returnees. We stress that it is crucial to support these efforts through sustained, sufficient, and predictable funding, with a view to moving from assistance to the country's recovery and development. Mr. President, Syria is turning towards peace in a regional environment that is clearly affected by violence. The Security Council must recognize this courageous effort. Colombia urges Syria to continue down this path through an inclusive process that will shore up its national reconstruction process and sustain peace in the country. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia and now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Liberia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and my own country, Somalia. We thank Deputy Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Mr. Cordone, and ASG Musuya for their comprehensive briefing. And we have listened carefully to Ms. Mardini's remarks. We welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Syria in today's meeting. Today, Syria stands at a critical crossroads as it transitions through a complex period of national reconstruction amidst a volatile regional security landscape. The primary responsibility for protecting civilians and restoring lasting order remains with the Syrian authorities. And we underscore that a genuinely Syrian-led and a Syrian-owned political process in line with Resolution 2254 is the only viable path towards sustainable peace. In this regard, the A3 would like to highlight the following points. First, the A3 reiterates its unwavering commitment to Syria's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We call on all international actors to respect these core principles and refrain from unilateral actions or foreign-driven security arrangements that risk deepening regional divisions or undermine Syria's path to recovery. We remain concerned by the shock to the Syrian economy caused by the recent regional escalation, where surging global energy prices and the disruption of supply chains have led to a doubling of food prices in major urban centers over the last 30 days. Second, we acknowledge the ongoing efforts toward national reconciliation and the integration of security frameworks. While we welcome the continued implementation of ceasefire agreements, we emphasize that the transition of security responsibilities in the Northeast must be managed with the utmost care to ensure the protection of all communities. We remain encouraged by the steps taken to recognize all Syrians as essential and authentic parts of the national fabric, restoring the dignity and the rights of those long marginalized. Third, the A3 is deeply concerned by the humanitarian impact of the renewed influx of people fleeing regional violence. With over 118,000 individuals entering Syria from Lebanon in the last month alone, the already overstretched humanitarian response is facing unprecedented pressure. We emphasize the urgent need to maintain and expand safe, predictable, and principled humanitarian access across all of Syria, supported by adequate international funding, that matches the scale of this growing crisis. Fourth, the A3 condemns continued reports of Israeli military operations inside Syrian territories, which clearly not only violate international law, but also the 1974 disengagement agreement. The occupied Syrian Golan remains an integral part of Syria in accordance with Resolution 497 and call for a complete withdrawal from all Syrian territories. Furthermore, we remain vigilant regarding the threat of terrorism. While we note the efforts to manage detention facilities, the risk of a Daesh resurgence remains a serious concern that requires coordinated international cooperation and the safe repatriation of third country nationals. Fourth, and my final point, we underscore that the economic recovery and the rehabilitation of critical infrastructure are indispensable foundations for long-term stability. The international community must transition from emergency aid toward a comprehensive approach that supports Syria's reconstruction and the dignified voluntary return of refugees. We encourage the Syrian government to continue fostering an environment conducive to national unity and transitional justice. To conclude, Mr. President, the A3 reaffirms its full commitment to standing with the Syrian people. We urge this Council to remain united in supporting a political process that addresses the driver of instability and leads Syria toward a future of peace, dignity, and economic sovereignty. I thank you.
I thank the representatives of Somalia, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. Ambassador Barak, I welcome your presiding over today's meeting. I thank Deputy Special Envoy Cordone and Assistant Secretary General Musuya for their briefings. I've also listened attentively to Ms. Mardini's statement. I welcome the presence of the representatives of Syria, Turkey, and Algeria. Deputy Special Envoy Cordone recently visited Syria and engaged with the Syrian transitional government. China appreciates his efforts and supports the Office of the Special Envoy in fulfilling its mandate. I would like to make 3 points. First, it is important to promote a broad and inclusive process of political transition. The past month witnessed positive developments in Syria, and the situation has somewhat eased in the country's northeast. China has taken note of the various measures adopted by the Syrian transitional government to implement the comprehensive agreement on the integration process. China also takes note of the fact that the Syrian National Investigative Committee has submitted its report on the violence in Syria to the Ministry of Justice. The Syria question must ultimately be resolved through political means. China supports the principle of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned process and encourages all Syrian parties to engage in inclusive dialogue and promote political reconciliation in order to end the conflict and restore peace and stability at an early date. The Office of the Special Envoy can play a special role in Syria's political transition process and therefore should relocate its operations to Damascus as soon as possible. Second, it is imperative to combat terrorism with zero tolerance and effectively maintain security. Terrorism poses a grave threat to regional peace and security. Recently, Syria was rocked by a spate of terrorist attacks. There remain real risks of terrorists escaping detention centers amidst the chaos, and foreign terrorist fighters are still active in the country. The major shifts in the regional landscape could potentially be exploited by terrorist elements based in Syria for their expansion. China firmly opposes terrorism in all its forms and rejects any double standards in counter-terrorism efforts. We call upon the Syrian transitional government to fulfill its international obligations and take all effective measures to resolutely combat all international terrorist organizations designated by the Security Council, including the ETIM. Third, it is crucial to uphold a people-centered approach and alleviate the country's humanitarian plight. The humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire. 16.5 billion people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, and 7.1 million face food insecurity. Aid efforts struggle to keep up with the actual needs. China calls upon traditional donors to scale up their humanitarian assistance to Syria and redouble their efforts to address the humanitarian crisis. In light of the persistent challenges confronting the Syrian economy, relevant countries should take further measures to completely roll back the negative impact of unilateral sanctions and clear away the obstacles holding back Syria's economic recovery. President, our discussion of the situation in Syria cannot be detached from the broader regional context. The entire Middle East is being plunged into a dangerous precipice, and China is deeply concerned about this. Any further protraction of hostilities will only inflict even more suffering upon the local population and impinge heavily on the regional and global economies. China calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities to prevent a bigger conflagration and urges a swift return to dialogue and negotiations. China stays committed to playing a constructive role in the pursuit of peace. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China and now recognize the representative of Bahrain.
At the outset, I would like to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Tom Barak, the U.S. envoy for Syria, for presiding over today's session. I also extend my thanks to Mr. Claudio Cordoni, Deputy Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, and Ms. Joyce Msuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Ms. Yusra Mardini for their comprehensive briefings and for the important statements they have delivered. I also welcome the participation of the permanent representatives in today's meeting. Mr. President, in light of the difficult times in the Middle East region, marked by the brutal and unjustified Iranian aggression that targeted my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, as well as other GCC countries and Jordan, we stress that this aggression is a blatant violation of international law, the UN Charter, and the principles of good neighborhood. The Kingdom of Bahrain calls upon Iran to immediately cease these hostile acts and to stop employing its proxies and armed militias in the region. Bahrain warns that these practices risk escalating the situation and increasing existing tensions, which could lead to dangerous consequences affecting regional security and stability. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates its support for the sovereignty of the sisterly Syrian Arab Republic, its independence and territorial integrity. We reiterate that our rejection of foreign interferences in its internal affairs in a manner that ensures the return of refugees, facilitates the destruction and development, strengthens the economy, advances growth, prosperity, and sustainability for the Syrian people. The Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms that the security and stability of Syria constitute fundamental pillars of the security and stability of the entire region. In this context, I would like to highlight the following points. First, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the delisting of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the UN sanctions list. We consider this a significant and necessary step and an important opportunity to support the political reform process in the country and to initiate a new phase based on economic, developmental, and investment principles, restoring Syria's vital role in its Arab and international environment. Second, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the exchange of detainees in Al Suwaida Governorate between the Syrian government and the group known as the National Guard. The exchange was conducted under the supervision of the International Committee of the Red Cross. We also commend the role played by the United States in facilitating this process.
The Kingdom views this development as contributing positively to the roadmap in Al-Suwaida and represents a favorable opportunity to strengthen the spirit of national responsibility among all Syrian parties by prioritizing the nation's higher interest and engaging seriously in national reconciliation. In turn, this will support the consolidation of civil peace in the Syrian Arab Republic and rejects any action that may inflame sectarianism or division. Third, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the steps taken by the sisterly governments of Syria and Lebanon to secure their borders, and we call upon them to continue these efforts to confront armed groups, to combat the smuggling of weapons and drugs, and to prevent any security breakdown, especially in light of the serious security escalations in the region. Fourth, the Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the outcomes of the visit of the UN Deputy Special Envoys to Damascus last February and reaffirms the cooperation of the United Nations to support the new Syrian government. The Kingdom also values the role of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and the efforts of humanitarian agencies in assisting affected people and displaced, and in preparing conditions conducive for the safe and voluntary return of Syrian refugees. Fifth, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates the importance of the Golan Heights and that the Golan Heights is a Syrian Arab land. And we value the important role played by the UN Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF, in supporting security and stability, contributing to the protection and safety of civilians in that area. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain commends the efforts of the sisterly Syrian Arab Republic in reconstruction, recovery, and development, and in supporting the country's future to achieve progress, prosperity, and the well-being of the noble Syrian people. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain and recognize the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome to the Security Council. I thank Deputy Special Envoy Cordone and ASG Monsieur for their briefings. And in particular, I thank Ms. Mardini for her powerful testimony. I also welcome the participation of the representatives of the Syrian Arab Republic, Turkey, and Algeria in our meeting today. I will make 3 points. First, the current conflict in the region is having a profound impact on neighboring countries. Iran's reckless attacks threaten to escalate the conflict and further disrupt supply chains and economic security. As we've heard, the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel is also exacerbating humanitarian vulnerability and displacing tens of thousands into Syria, many of them women and children. This adds to an already difficult humanitarian situation and places further strain on fragile services. My Foreign Secretary has underlined the UK's grave concern at the developing conflict and called for de-escalation. The UK has announced $20 million in emergency humanitarian support across the region, half of which will support organizations in Lebanon. In Syria, we've released an additional $650,000 to support those impacted by the crisis, including vulnerable women and girls. Second, Mr. President, the UK welcomes continued progress on implementing the agreement between the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces. I want to pay tribute to the work of the US and to you personally, Mr. President, in brokering this agreement. Ongoing security cooperation, initial appointments of SDF officials to government posts, and the return of Kurdish families to areas of Afrin are vital steps that build confidence and pave the way towards a stable and unified Syria. Elections in Raqqa Governorate are a further positive sign and an important step towards developing a representative and inclusive Syrian political system. We hope to see further momentum maintained and resolution of outstanding issues including prisoner exchanges and military integration. And third, I welcome the efforts of Deputy Special Envoy Cardoni to renew and strengthen the UN's relationship with the government of Syria. The Envoy's office plays an important role in coordinating the UN's support to Syria's recovery. We hope to see its relocation to Damascus in the near future to better enable UN support on the ground. We encourage the UN and the Syrian government to work constructively towards this goal. Colleagues, 15 years since the initial uprising against Assad and 15 months since his ousting, we continue to see genuine and historic progress in Syria. We must do all we can to maintain momentum towards a more stable and secure future for the Syrian people. And I thank you.
Thank the representative of the United Kingdom. And I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me welcome your participation, Ambassador Barak. I wish to thank our briefers, Assistant Secretary General Musuya and Deputy Special Envoy Cordone, for their always thorough remarks and reiterate our support for the prompt establishment of the Office of the Special Envoy in Damascus. I would particularly like to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Yusra Mardini, a proud Syrian woman, and thank her for sharing her compelling vision for her country with us. Let me start, Mr. President, by saluting the restraint demonstrated by the Syrian leadership in navigating the current regional context. Following Hezbollah's triggering of another round of escalation between Israel and Lebanon, Syria experiences the shock waves of increased volatility in its immediate neighborhood. Syria's stability and prosperity is key for the stability of the broader region. Greece will stand by Syria and spare no effort to help it navigate this challenging period and pursue the path of institutional and economic reforms and economic recovery. On this note, I wish to stress the following points today. Syria must pursue a fully inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition, while ensuring the protection and meaningful participation of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religion. The international community expects that all Syrians, be them Muslim, Alawite, Kurd, Christian, or Druze, will meaningfully participate in their country's political affairs, governance, and administration, and feel protected and fully part of this country. This is important for Syria's long-term stability and prosperity. While progress has been made, this past year also saw major incidents of violence against civilians, as highlighted in the recently published Commission of Inquiry report. We mourn the victims of this indiscriminate violence, not forgetting those who died at the Greek Orthodox Mar Elias Church terrorist attack. These incidents are demonstrative of the work that lies ahead in terms of transitional justice and reconciliation, work that can only be undertaken in cooperation with international institutions such as the IIIM, International Impartial and Independent Mechanism, or the Independent Institution on Missing Persons. We welcome in this context the release of the final report on the July 2025 violence in Sueda and the referral of all suspects to justice. We expect justice to be delivered according to international standards as a prerequisite for reconciliation. Work on transitional justice and other fields needs to be undertaken in collaboration with the UN, as the Deputy Special Envoy's recent visit highlighted. Mr. President, as this is CSW Week, and as Ms. Mardini has demonstrated today, the meaningful and equal participation of women in the Syrian political transition and security apparatus is critical and vital. There is still work that lies ahead in drafting the Constitution and ensuring the appropriate checks and balances, in filling the remaining parliamentary seats in a way which will hopefully compensate for underrepresented components of the Syrian society, and in fully implementing the agreement with the SDF, among others. Kurds should be fully integrated into Syrian society in a manner that provides them with a sense of protection and security, and with their political and cultural rights safeguarded. In this regard, we welcome once again the presidential decree formally recognizing Kurdish identity and incentivizing inclusivity as a very positive step, and we look forward to its full implementation. Similarly, a structured institutional manner for incorporating the input of Syrian civil society is required. Mr. President, Syria is part of a volatile region whose instability must not push it over the brink. In a tragic twist of events, for many fleeing Lebanon, Syria now seems to be a safe haven, albeit the fact is also indicative of the progress made, a progress which remains vulnerable. As Assistant Secretary Musa described, humanitarian needs are stark for millions of Syrians. International support is thus sorely needed, especially in the northeast, where some 120,000 people remain displaced. Greece vows to do its utmost to support the Syrian people and stand by their side. In addition, the danger of extremism and terrorism nourished by instability and despair looms large. The security of the remaining Daesh ISIS detention centers and camps must be fully safeguarded, and counter-terrorism efforts must be carried out in conjunction with the reforms in the security sector. It is important to have more information on the situation on the ground following reports of escapes or liberations of detainees. On this occasion, we would like once again to acknowledge Iraq's decision to receive detainees in its territory. In conclusion, Mr. President, the will to turn the page is there. We must collectively support this, openly calling for course correction when necessary, while taking stock of positive developments so far. The UN is a uniquely placed advocate and partner in this journey, which has our full support. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, and we welcome you in the President's chair. We thank Deputy Special Envoy Claudio Cordene, Assistant Secretary General Joyce Masuya for their briefings, as well as Ms. Yusra Mardini for her remarks. The situation in the Middle East remains deeply concerning, with a growing risk of wider regional conflagration. In such a complex and volatile environment, it is imperative that Syria is insulated and prevented from these destabilizing developments as the country gradually moves toward recovery and stabilization. It is important for the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process to continue to advance in a credible, inclusive, and timely manner. The completion of institutional arrangements, including legislative structures, is essential for long-term stability and legitimacy. We look forward to the conclusion of the parliamentary process in the Northeast, as well as the appointment of the remaining members of the legislature. Pakistan also supports the continued engagement and constructive role of the United Nations. Pakistan welcomes the 30 January agreement between the government and the Syrian Democratic Forces as a constructive step towards national integration. Effective implementation of this agreement will require sustained dialogue, mutual trust, and a commitment to avoiding actions that could undermine confidence. In this regard, recent steps taken by the Syrian government, including institutional appointments, are encouraging and should be built upon. The security transition remains central to Syria's stabilization. the integration of armed groups into unified national structures, effective border management, and intensified efforts to combat terrorism, including against Daesh, must remain key priorities. The presence of foreign terrorist fighters continues to pose a serious threat and requires coordinated international attention. On the economic front, there has been improvement, but as the Deputy Special Envoy said, it is fragile. The lifting of sanctions provides legal space for state activity, banking, transport, energy, and reconstruction. However, the recent regional developments could undermine these efforts. We also welcome the activation of sovereign account of Central Bank of Syria at the Federal Reserve Bank. The opening created by sanctions relief must be effectively utilized through strengthened institutions. On the humanitarian front, the situation remains dire for millions of Syrians. We stress the importance of scaling up early recovery efforts through adequate funding and support for basic services, infrastructure, and livelihoods. Mr. President, Israel must vacate its illegal occupation of the Syrian Golan. Any actions that alter the status of the area of separation are unacceptable. The 1974 disengagement agreement must be fully respected in line with the relevant resolutions, including resolutions 338 and 497. Respect for Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity is imperative. President, after years of devastating conflict, Syria stands at a critical juncture. While challenges persist, there are opportunities for stabilization and recovery. This moment requires sustained international engagement, constructive regional cooperation, and a firm commitment to Syria's unity and sovereignty. The international community must support Syria in rebuilding its institutions, advancing an inclusive political process, and fostering conditions for durable peace and stability. President, this Council must remain mindful of the broader regional context. The evolving situation in the Middle East remains a matter of deep concern, given its far-reaching implications for both regional stability and global peace. In this context, Pakistan remains actively engaged and is committed to play a role towards resolving the prevailing grave security crisis faced by the region, and support all efforts aimed at immediate cessation of all hostilities, de-escalation, and peaceful resolution of disputes. Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Mohammad Ishaq Dar, is also undertaking a visit to Riyadh from today to attend a meeting of the foreign ministers of regional countries in an effort to call for a swift end to the ongoing conflict and urge the need for return to dialogue and diplomacy. We believe this Council should rally behind such efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan and turn the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr.
Bienvenue au
President.
Conseil.
A very warm welcome to the
Et
Council.
merci pour votre engagement
Thank you
personnel
for
comme
your
national.
personal commitment and your national
Je
commitment as well.
remercie l'envoyé spécial
I would like
adjoint,
to thank the
Monsieur
Deputy
Cordonnet.
Special Envoy,
Nous
Mr.
nous assurons
Cordone.
de notre soutien dans son action.
You can count on our
Madame
support
la sous-secrétaire
for your
générale
work.
aux affaires humanitaires, Madame
ASG for
Souya,
Humanitarian Affairs,
que nous
Ms.
remercions
Soya,
pour l'engagement
thank you
humanitaire
for your
aux
humanitarian
côtés de la
commitment,
Syrie
standing
et
shoulder to shoulder
ambassadrice
with
de bonne
Syria.
volonté
I
du
also wish to
commissariat aux
thank the
réfugiés, Madame
Goodwill
Larijani,
Ambassador,
que nous remercions pour un
Ms.
témoignage
Yusra Mardini.
extrêmement
Thank
puissant.
you for your very
Vos
powerful
exposés illustrent
testimony.
le mélange
Your
d'espoir et
briefings illustrate the
d'inquiétude
mix of
qui nous
hope
anime
and
aujourd'hui en ce
concern
point
which
mentionné.
drives us today.
Notre premier objectif ici aujourd'hui est
Our
simple.
foremost objective
Protéger la
here
Syrie
today is
de
simple:
l'incendie qui
protecting
fait à nouveau
Syria
rage dans la région et
from the
menace de
region, which is one
l'embraser elle
again
aussi.
being engulfed
La France,
in flames, and Syria risks
en
being
même temps qu'elle
engulfed as
appelle au
well.
retour de la
France,
négociation sur
while
tous les
calling
fronts,
for a return to
est
negotiations
activement
across the
engagée
board, is also actively
dans
committed
ce but.
to the
Elle
aforementioned
attend de notre
objective.
Conseil qu'il appelle le
We
Hezbollah
expect
à
for the
cesser ses
Council to
attaques,
call on Hezbollah
dont
to end
certaines
its
ont atteint la
attacks,
Syrie,
some of which
comme
have
le
hit
10 mars
Syria.
à
For
Sargaya.
example, the attack
Elle
in
attend de
Segaya
notre
on the 10th of
Conseil
March.
qu'il réaffirme
We are
son
expecting the
attachement au
Security Council to
respect par
reiterate its
tous
commitment
de la souveraineté et de
to
l'intégrité
ensuring all
territoriale de la
respect the
Syrie.
sovereignty and territorial
Il
integrity of
serait
Syria.
irresponsable
It would be
de jouer des
irresponsible
difficultés de ce pays et d'y soutenir
to
des
play up
forces de
the
division.
difficulties this
Elle appuie la
country is
décision de la
experiencing
Syrie de
and
se tenir à
to sow further
l'écart des combats à ses
discord.
frontières dans
We
un
hope
esprit de
that
retenue et de
that restraint
désescalade,
will be
de
exercised,
construction
that
de
there will
rapports
be
de paix avec ses
de-escalation,
voisins.
and that peace can be forged between
Elle
Syria
entend
and
et
its
relaie
neighbors.
les appels humanitaires.
We
Des
hear
dizaines
and
de milliers de
repeat
personnes
the
déplacées par le
humanitarian
conflit
call to
doivent
help
pouvoir être
all of the people
dignement
displaced by the
accueillies.
conflict. They should be granted
Monsieur le Président, nous
dignified
appuyons la Syrie
conditions.
dans
Mr.
ses
President,
efforts de
we
réconciliation
we
nationale
support Syria in its
avec le
efforts
soutien des
aimed
mécanismes
at national
internationaux.
reconciliation with due support from
La France
international
salue les
mechanisms.
progrès dans la mise en œuvre de
France commends
l'accord
the
entre les
progress
forces
made
démocratiques
on
syriennes et
implementing
les
the
autorités de
agreement
Damas.
between
Il s'agit
the
d'un pas
Syrian Democratic
fondateur
Forces and Damascus.
qui permet
This is
d'enclencher une dynamique
an
positive de
important step forward,
réconciliation
triggering a
à l'échelle
positive
nationale. Nous
dynamic
saluons également la
aimed at
publication du
reconciliation at
rapport
the
de la
national
Commission
level.
d'enquête
We
nationale
welcome the
sur
publication
les crimes
of
commis à Suéda
the
en
report of the
juillet.
Commission of
Ce
Inquiry
rapport contribue à la lutte contre
regarding the crimes committed in
l'impunité.
Sueda in July,
Mais la
which will
situation
contribute to the
reste
fight against
tendue.
impunity. Nonetheless, the
Et je le
situation remains
répète,
tense.
toute
And let me
tentative
repeat what I said
d'instrumentalisation
earlier.
extérieure
Any
des
attempt
communautés de
to
la Syrie
instrumentalize the
avec pour but de nuire à son
situation amongst
unité
Syrian
est
communities,
déplorable et
attempts coming from the
contre-productif.
outside and aiming to sow discord between communities is
Nous
deplorable.
encourageons la justice
It must
syrienne
cease.
à
We
coopérer avec les
encourage
mécanismes internationaux.
the Syrian
La réconciliation
judiciary to cooperate with
passe
international
par la
mechanisms.
justice
Reconciliation
transitionnelle,
requires
loin des logiques de
transitional
vengeance.
justice, which
Nous
is free
appuyons
from the logic
le
of
patient
revenge.
travail de reconstruction
We
politique
support the
dans
patient
lequel est
work
engagé
of
le
political
pays.
reconstruction which the country is involved
Constitution,
in.
démocratie locale,
A constitution,
Parlement,
local democracy, a
élections
parliament,
libres, égale
free
participation
elections,
des femmes,
equal participation for
respect
women,
pour chaque citoyen,
respect for each
chacun
and every
pleinement
citizen,
syrien dans la mosaïque des identités et des
involving all
communautés de ce pays.
Syrians in the mosaic of
Monsieur le
various communities and
Président,
identities
le
that make up the
Conseil
country.
peut saluer
Mr. President,
la décision de la
the
Syrie de
Council
rejoindre la
can
coalition
commend
internationale
Syria's
contre
decision
Daesh,
to
cadre
rejoin the international
indispensable
coalition against
pour
Daesh.
combattre le
This
terrorisme
is
qui
a
continue
necessary
à frapper
framework
le
to
pays,
combating the
la
terrorism
région et
that
le monde.
continues to hit
Ne
the
nourrissons
country, the
pas
region, and the
d'illusions,
world at large.
de longs efforts
We
seront
harbor
encore
no
nécessaires
illusions. We
pour
have our work
débarrasser
cut out for us if we
de
are
ce fléau
to get
meurtrier.
rid of this
Vous le savez, la
deadly
France est
scourge.
déterminée à poursuivre
As you
sans
know,
relâche,
France
aux
is
côtés de ses
committed to
partenaires
tirelessly
syriens et
working hand
irakiens
by
et tous les
hand with
membres
our
de la
Iraqi
coalition,
and
la
Syrian
lutte contre
partners,
le
as well as
terrorisme.
all members of the
Le
coalition, so
transfert
as
de
to fight
prisonniers
terrorism.
et la fermeture de
The
camps dans le
prisoner
nord-est syrien
transfers
appellent à la plus grande
and the closure of
vigilance
camps
de la
in the
part de la
Syrian
communauté
northeast
internationale.
requires the greatest possible
Enfin,
vigilance on the part of the
nous
international
appuyons le
community.
dialogue
Last but
entre la
not least,
Syrie et les
we
Nations
support the
unies
dialogue between Syria
pour
and the United Nations.
définir le
The
cadre
aim
de leur
being
contribution
to
à la politique
ensure that we have
inclusive
a
en
carefully
Syrie
crafted
de
framework for
réconciliation dans le
Syria's
respect de sa souveraineté.
reconciliation with full respect for its
Il faut
sovereignty.
désormais avancer sur
We
un
now
mandat
need to make
soigneusement défini,
headway on a
une présence
clear-cut
au plus près du
mandate,
terrain
a presence
semble
that's as
adaptée
close
face à
as possible
l'ampleur des
to
défis.
the ground seems
Cette
fitting
expertise des Nations
given the
Unies
scale of the challenge.
favorisera la réponse
The
humanitaire,
expertise of the United
le
Nations
relèvement
will
économique du
promote
pays
a humanitarian
avec
response,
mobilisation
the
de
country's
nouveaux
economic
financements
recovery,
publics et privés
and the
et
mobilization
le
of
retour
new
volontaire des
private and public
Syriennes et des
investment,
Syriens
as well as
dans
the
des conditions
return
dignes.
of
Il faut
Syrians
que la levée de la
on a
majorité des
dignified basis.
sanctions
The lifting of the
établies,
majority of
effectives,
sanctions, which
se
has
traduisent
occurred,
désormais
which
en
is
retombées
effective,
économiques
must now
en
result
ouvrant la
in
voie à la
economic
mobilisation des
upside,
investissements
an
nécessaires.
economic upside with
Monsieur
the
le
necessary
Président, deux
investment being
pays
mobilized. Mr.
sortant de
President,
longs conflits,
two
le
countries
Liban et la
have
Syrie,
put behind them
sont
many years of
aujourd'hui
conflict, Lebanon and
menacés
Syria. Today,
et
they
même
are under
directement
threat.
atteints,
In fact,
ébranlés
they
par
are
l'escalade
being
militaire
directly
actuelle.
hit
Notre Notre Conseil ne
by
saurait
the military
détourner le regard de
escalation.
cette réalité.
Our Security Council
La France réitère
cannot
son soutien
turn
à
away
leur
its
intégrité
gaze. We must
territoriale,
express
à
support
la
for their
recherche d'une
territorial
solution
integrity,
diplomatique aux conflits
for
en
the search
cours et à l'arrêt
for a
des
diplomatic solution
hostilités.
to the conflicts
En même temps
underway
qu'ils
and to the
œuvrent à la
hostilities. At the
désescalade
same time,
régionale,
a
le
regional
Conseil et la
de-escalation
communauté
is
internationale
necessary.
tout entière
The
doivent
Security Council
poursuivre
and
leur
the entire
soutien
international
à la
community must
stabilité,
continue
à
lending
l'unité
its support
et
to
à
the
la
stability,
réconciliation de
unity,
la Syrie.
and
Je vous remercie.
reconciliation of Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France, and I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also begin by warmly thanking you for your presiding over this meeting on this symbolic and meaningful date for the people of Syria, marking the 15 years since the beginning of the revolution. I also thank Deputy Special Envoy Claudia Cordone and ASG Joyce Msuya for their briefings. And I would like to warmly thank Ms. Yusra Mardini for sharing her insights and the inspiring example she has set through her personal experience. And I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Syria to this meeting. Mr. President, the current crisis in the Middle East raises serious concerns about the challenges Syria may face in the period ahead. Syria is affected by the falling military debris and the pressure of the migratory influx caused by the escalation in Lebanon. And especially if this increases and continues, could pose risks to Syria's internal stability. And we acknowledge Syria's constructive engagement with its neighboring countries and encourage continued border security coordination to mitigate the negative spillover effects on Syria's security arising from the ongoing regional escalation. And let me reiterate Latvia's firm commitment to Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite improvements, Syria continues to face severe humanitarian needs. Millions of people requiring food assistance, medical care, shelter, clean water, and other essential services. Prolonged regional tensions risk undermining these fragile gains and exacerbating vulnerabilities across the country. Against this backdrop, the international community's efforts to strengthen Syria's security and stability must continue and be reinforced. Measures that facilitate investment, trade, and development, including the gradual lifting of sanctions, have an important role in supporting transitional government's political, economic, and humanitarian priorities. They also contribute to sustainable recovery and resilience. Through participation in the global coalition to defeat ISIS and by combating terrorism within its territory, the Syrian transitional government has demonstrated a clear commitment to tackling threats posed by terrorism and taking responsibility for the country's security. And we urge the international community to further support Syria's counter-terrorism efforts, acknowledging that resurgence of Daesh would threaten Syria and the wider region alike. And in this regard, we also acknowledge Iraq's important strategic role in countering terrorism and preventing the re-emergence of Daesh in the Middle East. Mr. President, we welcome the steps taken by the Syrian transitional government and the Syrian Democratic Forces to consolidate the ceasefire agreed in January. The peaceful implementation of comprehensive administrative and security integration in northeast Syria paves the way for stability and reconstruction for the benefit of local population. And the progress achieved so far should be further consolidated and advanced, including through the parliamentary elections taking place in the governorates of Al-Hasaka and Raqqa. We are awaiting the appointment of the remaining members of the People's Assembly, and this would demonstrate a continued commitment to an inclusive political transition with a meaningful participation of women and representatives of all ethnic and religious communities in Syria. Progress towards peace building and traditional justice remains essential across the country. The report of Syria's National Investigation Committee on the violence perpetrated against civilians in Sueda in July 25 and recent prisoner exchange between the Syrian government and representatives of the Druze community facilitated by the Syrian Red Crescent and ICRC are welcome steps. We encourage the Syrian transitional government and the relevant national bodies to continue their constructive engagement with the international, impartial, and independent mechanism on Syria and the independent institution on missing persons in the Syrian Arab Republic. Such cooperation is essential for enabling genuine national reconciliation through accountability for grave violations and for making progress in clarifying the fate of missing persons. And in conclusion, Mr. President, we welcome the ongoing constructive engagement between the Syrian government and the representatives of the United Nations. We hope that the recent visits to Damascus by Deputy Special Envoy Cordone, as noted also in today's briefing, and by USG Fraser will lead to tangible progress. and we look forward to further arrangements in the near future, as this would allow the United Nations to meaningfully contribute through its tools and expertise to Syria's stabilization and development. And I thank you.
I thank you, Representative of Latvia, and I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Me complace extender una cordial
I'm pleased
bienvenida
to
al enviado
convey
especial de
a
los
warm
Estados Unidos
greeting
a
to
Siria,
the
Su Excelencia
U.S.
Tom
Special
Barrack,
Envoy for Syria, His
así
Excellency
como
Mr. Thomas
a los
Barrack,
representantes
as
de la
well
República
as the
Árabe Siria,
representatives of the
Turquía
Syrian
y
Arab Republic,
Algeria,
Turkey, and
que nos
Algeria,
distinguen con su
who honor
participación.
us with their participation.
Los acontecimientos recientes
The recent
ponen de
events
relieve
highlight
una vez más
once again
cómo las
how
dinámicas de
regional
inestabilidad regional
instability
continúan
continues to
afectando
affect
la
the
situación
situation
dentro de Siria
inside
y
Syria
alteran las
and
condiciones
to
necesarias para
disrupt the
avanzar
conditions
hacia un
needed
entorno
to
más
foster an
propicio
environment that is
para
more
impulsar
conducive
una solución
to
política,
a
social y
sustainable
económica
political, social,
sostenible.
and economic solution.
En este sentido,
In
reiteramos
this
que las
context,
acciones
we reiterate
unilaterales
that
agravan
unilateral
la
action
inestabilidad en
exacerbates
una región
instability
ya
in a region that
afectada
is
por
already
múltiples
affected
crisis.
by myriad crises.
Toda acción militar
Any
en el
military
territorio
action
o espacio aéreo
on
de
the
otro
territory
Estado
or in the
debe
airspace of another
evitarse
state must be
en
avoided,
estricto respeto
strictly in
al derecho
accordance with international law,
a la Carta de las
the
Naciones
Charter of the
Unidas
United
y a
Nations,
los
and the
principios de
principles
soberanía,
of sovereignty,
independencia política
political
e integridad
independence, and
territorial.
territorial integrity.
Acogemos con beneplácito
We welcome
los
the
compromisos de las
commitments
autoridades
made by
sirias,
Syrian authorities,
particularmente el
particularly
respaldo
the
manifestado
support
a la
expressed
soberanía,
for
seguridad y estabilidad
Lebanon's
del Líbano, así
sovereignty,
como la
security, and
disposición a
stability,
abrir un
as
nuevo
well as its
capítulo
readiness
de
to open
cooperación
a
mutua.
new chapter in
La
mutual
escalada
cooperation.
actual
The
tiene
current
ya
escalation
repercusiones
is
humanitarias
already
tangibles
having
en
tangible
Siria.
humanitarian
Se han
repercussions in Syria.
registrado caída de
The country
escombros
has
de
already been
artefactos
affected by
militares,
falling debris
mientras
from
que
military hardware,
aproximadamente
while
100.000
approximately
personas han
100,000
llegado
people have
desplazadas
been
desde el Líbano.
displaced to Syria
De
from Lebanon.
persistir esta ofensiva,
If this offensive were
existe
to
el riesgo de
continue,
mayores
there would be a
interrupciones a
risk
las
of
cadenas de
greater
suministro
interruptions to
y un
supply
incremento
chains
de los precios,
and price
lo que
rises,
agravaría aún más
which would
las
further
presiones
heighten the
que
pressure
enfrentan las
on the most
comunidades más
vulnerable
vulnerables,
communities,
donde
which
persisten
continue
importantes
to face
carencias
notable
en servicios
shortages of essential
esenciales.
services.
En este contexto, será
In this
fundamental
context, it is
mantener el
fundamental
financiamiento
to
humanitario,
maintain humanitarian
preservar los
financing,
esfuerzos de
preserve
desescalada y
de-escalation
fortalecer
efforts, and
las
to boost
inversiones en
investments in
recuperación y
recovery and
desarrollo
development
durante
during
este
this
delicado
delicate
periodo de
transition
transición.
period.
Resulta alentador
It is encouraging
observar
to
mejoras
see
en el acceso
improvements in
humanitario,
humanitarian
incluyendo la
access,
reapertura de rutas
including the
clave que
reopening of
conectan
key
a
routes
Gasec
connecting
y el envío de convoyes hacia
Al-Hasake
zonas como
and the
Ain
dispatch
al-Arab
of
en
convoys
Kobani.
towards areas such as Ain
Panamá
al-Arab,
reitera su
Kobani.
firme respaldo a las
Panama
gestiones de las
reiterates
Naciones
its firm
Unidas,
backing for
en
the efforts
particular a
made
la
by the United
intención de
Nations, in
reubicar en
particular
Damasco
the
la
intention
oficina
to
del enviado
relocate
especial,
the
cuya labor
Special
es
Envoy's office to
fundamental para que el
Damascus. The
acompañamiento
Special
de este
Envoy's
Consejo
work is indeed
pueda
vital
coadyuvar al esfuerzo
to
conjunto de la
ensure that
reconstrucción.
this Council's support can contribute
Seguimos
to the joint
atentos al
reconstruction
desarrollo
efforts.
del proceso
We are
de
closely following the
constitución de la
constitution
Asamblea del
process
Pueblo.
in the People's Assembly,
Reiteramos que
and
el
we
presidente
reiterate
interino
that
tiene en la
through the
designación de los
appointment of the
parlamentarios
remaining
restantes
parliamentarians,
la
the interim
oportunidad de
president has the
demostrar
chance to
inequívocamente
unequivocally
la voluntad de
demonstrate a
inclusión de las
willingness to
mujeres
include
y de las
women
comunidades
and minority
minoritarias.
communities.
De igual manera, tomamos nota de los informes de la Comisión
Likewise,
Nacional
we take
de
note of the
Investigación
reports of
sobre
the
los
National
hechos
Investigation
ocurridos en
Committee
Sueida,
into events in
así como los
Sueda,
recientes
as well
esfuerzos
as on
para
recent efforts
esclarecer
to
el
shed
paradero de
light on the
personas
whereabouts of missing
desaparecidas en
persons in
Siria,
Syria,
incluidas las
including investigations
investigaciones sobre
into
presuntos
alleged
sitios
sites
de
of mass
fosas
graves
comunes
in
en
Aleppo and
Idlib.
Idlib.
Consideramos que estos mecanismos
We believe that these
constituyen un
mechanisms
paso
represent an
importante
important
hacia
step
la rendición de
towards
cuentas
ensuring
y el
accountability
alivio del
and
sufrimiento de
easing the
las
suffering
familias
of
que aún
those
buscan a
families
sus
still
seres queridos.
searching for their loved ones.
Señor presidente,
Mr.
el
President,
camino
the
recorrido
distance
por
traveled
Siria
by
y los
Syria
esfuerzos positivos de su
and the
gobierno
positive efforts
hasta
of its
alcanzar
government
la
to
realidad
reach
actual
the current reality
merecen el reconocimiento
deserve the
nuestro y el
recognition
respaldo de
and
toda la comunidad
support of the
internacional.
entire international community.
El pueblo siria
The Syrian people are looking hopefully towards this new phase in which they aspire to build their future themselves, based on respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, where their diversity is valued and the country can be fully reintegrated into the international scene, contributing positively to peace and stability. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the representative of Panama. And now I will make a statement in my capacity as Special Envoy for Syria of the United States. Colleagues, it's an honor to be here with you at the Security Council as President Trump's Special Envoy to Syria. My thanks to all of the briefers and representatives today. And it is a great pleasure to welcome our civil society briefer for today, Ms. Yusra Mardini. Thank you. Over the past 15 months, we've witnessed the most significant transformations in Syria in decades. The collapse of the Assad regime, the emergence of a new government, and unprecedented diplomatic breakthroughs. The United States and the global community, including the Council, have supported the Syrian government as it restores its place in the region and its internal system. Since the start of his administration, President Trump's approach has been to facilitate Syrian-led processes and support a unified Syria at peace with itself and its neighbors, with meaningful protections for all communities. That clear focus, with the support of partners and the determination of the Syrians themselves, has led to historic achievements unimaginable 2 years ago. The Syrian government and SDF reached a permanent ceasefire and a comprehensive integration agreement in January, which provides real protection for the Syrian Kurds and brings Northeast civilian and military structures under national control. Syria joined the de-ISIS coalition and has conducted joint operations to disrupt the terror networks of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah, along with the Iranian aligned groups. Syria, with the support of the United States and Jordan, has also consolidated the ceasefire in Ceuta and committed to holding those responsible for atrocities accountable, an important step on the path towards transitional justice. Syria has also rejected Tehran's malign influence and expelled remnants of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Remarkably, a country that only 2 years ago was a cornerstone of Iran's so-called axis of resistance, has now condemned Iran's dangerous and cowardly assault on other Arab countries. Indeed, Syria is now the target of attacks by Iran's terrorist proxy, Hezbollah. The United States condemns those attacks and welcomes the cooperation between Syria and Lebanon to secure their shared border, as many of you have referred to. Syria and Israel are also taking steps to stabilize their relations and move toward peace, an effort the United States is supporting through a joint fusion mechanism involving our three countries. Well over 2 million refugees and internally displaced have now returned home, where they can contribute to the rebuilding of their country. As the holy month of Ramadan comes to a close and families prepare to celebrate Eid, for the first time in years, they will be celebrating with loved ones inside Syria. Our contribution to UNHCR, UNICEF, and other humanitarian organizations in Syria are helping families meet their basic needs and are also supporting the dignified reintegration of families to their communities of origin. But thanks to President Trump's actions, Syria now has a chance to end its dependence on foreign aid. U.S. and international sanctions relief, including the Council's adoption of Resolution 2799 last November and the delisting of HTS last month, have unlocked opportunities for Syrians not only to survive, but to actually thrive. We call on members of this council and all nations to support the Syrian government during this transition. This includes enhancing Syria's counterterrorism capabilities, contributing to its reconstruction, and repatriating third country nationals from displaced persons camps and detention facilities. Fully addressing the humanitarian and security challenges in Syria requires that countries of origin repatriate, rehabilitate, and eventually reintegrate their nationals currently in Syria, and when appropriate, ensure they face justice for their actions. Colleagues, the United States is proud of what the Syrian people and their government have achieved since December 8th, 2024. Under President Donald Trump's leadership, we will continue to deepen our partnership and help Syria reclaim its rightful place, both as a beacon of stability abroad and as an exemplar of peace, unity, and tolerance at home. Thank you. I'll now return to my position as President of the Security Council, and we'll call upon the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank you, Mr. President.
أود بداية أن
At the
أعرب عن
outset,
الشكر والتقدير
I would like
لكم
to express
سعادة
our thanks and
السفير
appreciation
توم
to
باراك
you, Ambassador Tom Barak,
على الجهود الكبيرة
for the
التي
great
بذلتموها
efforts
دعما
that you
لسوريا
are making in
والتي
support of
تعكس
Syria,
بوضوح
which
رؤية
clearly
الرئيس دونالد
reflect
ترامب
President Donald
للسلام
Trump's
في المنطقة.
policy and vision towards peace
ويسعدني
in the region.
أن أول
I'm
اجتماعات
also
مجلس
pleased
الأمن
that the
لكم
first
التي
Security Council meeting
تترأسونها
that you are
اليوم
presiding over today,
تناقش إنجازات
that this
سوريا
meeting
رغم
is discussing
التحديات
serious achievements despite the
بعد أن
challenges
كانت جلسات
after
هذا
the
المجلس
Council's meetings
مكانا
in the
للتعطيل
past had been a place
والتشاؤم
for obstruction
بسبب سلوك النظام
and
البائد
pessimism over
لسنوات طوال.
the former regime's behavior
فهنيئا
for
لنا
many long years.
وهنيئا لكم
Congratulations to us, to you,
وللسوريين
and to the
الذين
Syrians who are
يحتفلون
celebrating
بذكرى ثورتهم
the anniversary
اليوم
of
بهذا
the
الإنجاز.
revolution today. We congratulate you all on
ويسرني
this
كذلك أن
achievement.
أتقدم
I'm
بالشكر
also
للسيد
pleased to
كلاوديو
extend my appreciation to
الذي
Mr.
عاد للتو من
Claudio,
دمشق
who has just returned from
ونتطلع
Damascus,
للعمل معه
and with whom we look forward
وللسيدة
to
جويس
working. And
على
to Ms.
تذكير
Joyce,
المجلس
we thank
بالوضع
her for
الإنساني
reminding us
الملح.
of the urgent
وأشكر
humanitarian
السيدة يسرى
situation.
مرديني
I thank Ms.
على
Yusra
روح الأمل
Mardini for the
التي
spirit
بعثتها
of
اليوم
hope
في هذا
that she
المجلس
conveyed in our council
ونتطلع
today.
لما
We look
ستقدمه
forward
هي
to
وجميع
what she,
السوريين
along with
والسوريات
all Syrian men
في
and women
الخارج لوطنهم
abroad,
الأم.
will offer to their motherland.
ويسعدني أيضا أن
I am also
أشكركم
pleased to thank you
جميعا
all,
فقد أظهرت
as
بياناتكم
your
اليوم
statements today
مجددا
have
توحد
once
المجلس
again
في
demonstrated the
دعمه
unity of
لسوريا
the Council in its
التي
support for
باتت
Syria,
واحة
which has become
للاستقرار
an oasis
والهدوء
of
بعيدا عن
stability and calm
عن
away
سياسات
from
الاستقطاب
policies of
والمحاور.
polarization and bloc politics.
السيد الرئيس،
Mr. President,
في مثل هذه الأيام قبل 15 عاما
very days,
انتفض
15 years
السوريون
ago, Syrian
والسوريات
men and women rose.
رفعوا
They
صوتهم
rose up
دون خوف
and raised their
أو
voices
وجل
with no fear, with no
مطالبين
hesitation.
بالحرية
They demanded freedom,
والكرامة
dignity,
والعدالة.
and justice.
لقد شكلت تلك اللحظة
That
بداية
moment
مسار طويل،
sparked the beginning of a long
مسار
path
دفع السوريون والسوريات
where Syrian men and
خلاله
women
أثمانا
paid
باهظة
a
من
heavy
الدماء،
price in blood,
من المعاناة،
in suffering,
من التهجير،
in displacement,
من الاعتقال،
in
من
arrests,
الاختناق بالكيماوي.
in being suffocated by chemical
فقدنا
weapons.
كثر،
We have lost many.
وقد عانى الشعب
The
السوري
Syrian people
كثيرا،
have suffered greatly.
ولكننا
But
سيد الرئيس
ultimately,
في نهاية المطاف
Mr. President,
صنعنا المعجزة.
we created a miracle.
إنها سوريا الجديدة،
This is a new Syria.
سوريا التي
It is a
تعتز
Syria
بنسيجها
that is
المتنوع
proud of its
وتفخر
diverse fabric,
بتنوعها.
that is proud of its rich
سوريا
pluralism
التي قررنا
and
نحن
diversity.
أن نبنيها
Syria,
على أساس
a
التضحيات
Syria that we
وقيم
decided to
الثورة.
build on the sacrifices and the
وقررتم
values of our
أنتم
revolution. A
أن
Syria
نقف
that
إلى
you
جانبها
decided to
ودعمها،
stand by and to support.
وهو خيار
It is a
تثبت
choice
الوقائع يوما
that
بعد
facts
يوم
prove day by day
أنه كان الخيار
was
الصحيح.
the right choice indeed.
وسأخبركم اليوم
And I will tell you
لماذا.
why.
أولا،
First,
على المستوى الوطني،
at the national level,
ولأن الترتيب الداخلي
and
هو
because
أساس
putting our
الاستقرار.
internal house in
بدأنا
order is the
بخطوات
foundation of
سياسية
stability.
عدة بقيادة
We've
سورية،
started taking several Syrian-led political steps.
وأنشأنا هيئات
We
وطنية
established
للعدالة
national bodies
الانتقالية
for transitional
والمفقودين.
justice and missing persons.
كما يتواصل اليوم بناء
Today,
المؤسسات
we continue
الوطنية
to build
بصورة
national
مسؤولة،
institutions in a responsible manner.
وقد تجسد ذلك في
This has been
محطات
embodied
عدة
in several
ليس
milestones,
آخرها
not least of
انتخابات
which
مجلس
were
الشعب
yesterday's People's
يوم
Assembly
أمس
elections
في الطبقة
in
والرقة.
الطبقة and Raqqa.
كما يشهد العالم اليوم كيف أن سوريا
The world
الجديدة
witnesses today how
تلتزم
the new Syria is
بتعهداتها
honoring its commitments and
واتفاقاتها
agreements
بعيدا عن
far
المراوغات
from
والمناورات.
evasions and maneuvering.
فهي تواصل تنفيذ بنود
Syria
الاتفاق
continues to
المبرم
implement the
مع
provisions of the
قوات سوريا
agreement
الديمقراطية
concluded with the Syrian
بهدف
Democratic
تعزيز
Forces
الأمن
with the
وترسيخ
aim of
الاستقرار
strengthening
واستكمال
security,
عملية الدمج
consolidating
الوطني.
stability, and completing the process of
وقبل كل
national
ذلك وفي
integration.
سياق منفصل
And before all of that,
صدر
in a
المرسوم
separate context,
الرئاسي
the
رقم
presidential decree
13
number
لعام
13
2026
of the year
الذي
2026 was
يؤكد أن
issued.
المواطنين
In it, it
السوريين
affirms
الكرد
that Syrian
جزء
Kurdish citizens
أصيل
are an
من الشعب
integral
السوري
part of the Syrian
ويشدد
people.
على أن هويتهم
The decree
الثقافية
stresses that their cultural
واللغوية
and linguistic
جزء لا
identity is an
يتجزأ من الهوية
inseparable part
الوطنية
of the
السورية
Syrian national identity,
وعلى التزام الدولة بحماية
and
هذا
that the
التنوع
state is committed to
كما
protecting
يقر
this
اللغة
diversity.
الكردية
The decree
لغة
also
وطنية
recognizes Kurdish
ويضمن
language
الحقوق
as a national
الثقافية
language and guarantees the
والمدنية
full cultural
الكاملة
and civil rights
للسوريين
of
والسوريات
Syrian
الكرد.
Kurdish men
وعلى
and
سبيل
women.
المثال
By way of example,
فقد انطلقت الاستعدادات
preparations have
للاحتفال
begun to
بعيد
celebrate
النوروز خلال
Nowruz
الأيام القادمة
in the
لأول
coming
مرة
days
كعيد
as a
وطني
national
يعكس
holiday
قيم
for the first
الربيع
time
والتآخي
to reflect
بين
the values
السوريين.
of spring and fraternity among Syrians.
إضافة لما سبق
In
ودعما
addition,
للاستقرار
and in
الاقتصادي
support
وتهيئة
of
الظروف
economic
المناسبة
stability
للتنمية
and to prepare for the conditions of
تمضي
reconstruction
سوريا
and
الجديدة
development,
في
the new
إعادة
Syria is
الانغماج
moving
في النظام
towards
المالي
reintegrating into the international
الدولي
financial system.
وتتطلع اليوم إلى
And
دعمكم
today it looks
لمسيرة
to your
البناء
support for the
بالاستثمارات
path of reconstruction
قبل
through
المساعدة.
investments before aid.
وفيما يتعلق بوضع المرأة
On the
فإن
status of
سوريا
women,
الجديدة تواصل تطوير
the new
مؤسساتها
Syria continues to develop its
بفتياتها
institutions
ونسائها
through its
حيث شهدنا
girls
قبل
and women. A
أيام
few days
افتتاح
ago, we
معهد
witnessed the
الشرطة
opening of
النسائية
the Women's Police
بعد أن
Institute
تضمنت الهيئات
after the
الوطنية
newly
المنشأة
established
تمثيلا
national
فاعلا
bodies
للنساء
included effective
السوريات
representation of Syrian
ناهيك
women.
عن
Not
الاستمرار
to
بدعم
mention the
المبادرات
continued support
المجتمعية ذات
given for
الصلة
relevant community
انسجاما مع
initiatives in
التزامات
line
سوريا
with
المحلية أولا
Syria's commitments
والمتعلقة
locally
بأجندة
related
المرأة
to women,
والسلام
peace, and
والسلم والأمن الدوليين
security agenda, as
ونتطلع
well as
إلى تفعيل
globally.
دور أكبر
We look forward to
للمرأة
a greater
السورية
activation of the
التي
role of
ضحت
Syrian women
كثيرا
who
طوال
have
سنوات الثورة في
sacrificed
مختلف
greatly throughout the years of
المجالات
revolution in the
والميادين.
different fields and arenas.
ثانيا
Second,
على مستوى المستوى الإقليم وعلى المستوى الدولي
at the level of the region and at the international level,
دعوني أقول لكم
allow me to tell you
ماذا أنهت
what Syria has
هذا
ended
العام.
this year.
أنهت سوريا الجديدة
Syria
صناعة
has
الكبتاغون التي
the Captagon industry
أرقت المنطقة
that had troubled the region.
وباتت سوريا اليوم
Syria
رائدة
today has
كما
become
شهدنا
a leader,
جميعا
as
في
we've
فيينا
all
قبل
seen in
أيام
Vienna a
في
few days ago,
مكافحة
a
المخدرات.
leader in combating drugs.
أنهت
It has ended
عرقلة معالجة
the
الملف
obstruction of
الكيميائي
addressing the chemical
الذي
fire
شغل العالم
that
بأسره.
preoccupied the entire world.
ويسعدني سيد
And
الرئيس
it gives
أن
me
من
pleasure,
يجلس خلفي
Mr.
اليوم
President, to say that those
هو
sitting behind me
شاهد
today
وناجي
is
من
a
ضربات
witness and a
هذا
survivor
النظام
to
الكيميائية
the chemical attacks
ولكنه
by this
يجلس
regime. But
خلفي
today he sits behind
بصفته
me
مندوب الجمهورية
as a
العربية
representative
السورية
of
في
the Syrian Arab
منظمة حظر
Republic
الأسلحة
at
الكيميائية
the OPCW
في لحظة
at a
تجسد
time
سوريا الجديدة.
where
وأرحب
new
في هذا
new
السياق
Syria is
أيضا
being embodied
بسعادة
here.
السفيرة
And I would
نيكول
also like to
شامبين
welcome Madam Nicole
مندوبة
Champagne, the
الولايات المتحدة
representative of the
ونشكرها على
United States, and
جهودها
we
في
thank
منظمة
her
حظر
for the
الأسلحة
work she's done
الكيميائية.
at the OPCW.
أنهت أيضا
Syria
سوريا غياب
has also
القيادة
ended
الوطنية
the absence
لمكافحة
of national
تنظيم
leadership
داعش
in combating
بانضمامها إلى
ISIS or
التحالف
Daesh by
الدولي.
joining the international coalition.
وأنهت أيضا
The new Syria
عرقلة
has also
آليات
ended
حقوق
the
الإنسان
obstruction of United
الأممية
Nations human rights
الأمر
mechanisms,
الذي عكسه
as
تقرير
reflected
اللجنة
in the
الأخيرة
latest report
تقرير اللجنة الدولية الأخيرة
of the
فيما سجله من خطوات إيجابية
International Commission of
وما
Inquiry
أقر به
and
من
the positive
تعاون
steps
سوري
it recorded
غير
and the
مسبوق
unprecedented
على
Syrian
مستوى
cooperation
اللجان
it
الدولية ذات
acknowledged
الصلة
on
في
the level
السياقات
of
الأخرى.
relevant national committees in
وفي الوقت
different
ذاته
contexts. At the same time,
أنهت سوريا سياسة
Syria has
الإنكار
ended the policy of denial
منذ زمن النظام البائد
that the former
وأبدت
regime
جديتها
had done.
الكاملة في التعامل مع
Syria
ما
has
أورده
demonstrated its full
التقرير
seriousness
من
in dealing with
انتهاكات
what the report
أو
intervention in terms of violations and abuses.
وهذا ما رأيناه يوم أمس
We saw this
مجددا
again
مع
yesterday
إصدار لجنة
with the
التحقيق
issuance
الوطنية
by
في
the
أحداث
National
السويداء
Investigation Committee into the
تقريرها
Somalia
النهائي
events of its
حول
final
الأحداث
report
المؤسفة
on the
التي شهدتها
unfortunate events
المحافظة
witnessed by the
العام
governorate
الماضي
last year.
والذي خلص التقرير
The
إلى
report
مجموعة واسعة
arrived at
من
a broad set
التوصيات
of
ركزت على
recommendations
مسار
focusing on the
المساءلة
paths of
وتعزيز
accountability,
الاستقرار ومنع
strengthening
الانتهاكات.
stability, and preventing the recurrence of
لقد
violations.
أنجزت سوريا الكثير
Syria has accomplished much
وأنهت كذلك
and
الكثير
has also ended much.
وهذا حق شعبنا
This is
علينا
our people's
محليا
right domestically. This is what our people deserve. And this is Syria's right internationally in a manner that befits its name.
على الرغم من الجهود المضنية التي تبذلها الحكومة السورية لبسط الأمن والاستقرار بعيداً عن الاستقطابات والمحاور، تواصل إسرائيل انتهاكاتها الجسيمة في الجنوب السوري من خلال التوغلات المتكررة في ريفي قنيطرة ودرعا ونصب الحواجز وقصف بعض المناطق والاعتداء على المواطنين عبر المداهمات وحالات الاختطاف التي طالت حتى الأطفال أثناء رعيهم للغنم. وإنني إذ أشكركم سعادة السفير توم باراك على جهودك الكبيرة التي تبذلونها في سياق الوساطة الأمريكية الرامية إلى ترسيخ الاستقرار. أجدد مطالبة بلادي للمجتمع الدولي ولمجلس الأمن بتحمل مسؤوليتهما ووضع حد لهذه الاعتداءات. ختاماً السيد الرئيس، عادة ما يجلب بعض الزملاء من السفراء إلى المجلس أدوات تعبر عن التحديات والصعوبات. أما اليوم فقد جلبت معي شيئاً يعبر عن دمشق. البروكار الذي لا طالما اشتهرنا به واشتهرت به دمشق عبر تاريخها. ذلك النسيج الدمشقي الفريد الذي تحاك خيوطه المتعددة بعناية فائقة لتكون قطعة واحدة متماسكة وجميلة. وسوريا في جوهرها تشبه هذا النسيج العريق. بلد تشكلت خيوطه من ثقافات وأديان وحضارات ومكونات عدة، فكان نسيجاً واحداً اسمه سوريا. بخيوطه التي تعبر كذلك عن آمال السوريين وآلامهم، إنجازاتهم وتحدياتهم. واليوم ومع عودة اللاجئين والمهجرين والمغتربين والتقاء أبناء مختلف المناطق السورية يتجدد التلاحم الوطني مؤكداً أنه ومهما تفرقت خيوط سوريا عبر الزمن تبقى قادرة على أن تجمع أبنائها وبناتها من جديد تحت راية واحدة ومستقبل واحد. وكما أبهر البروكار الدمشقي العالم لقرون، فإن سوريا الجديدة بما تختزنه من تاريخ وما تمتلكه من إرادة الحياة للمستقبل بمسلميها ومسيحيها ويهودها العائدين بعد عقود من التغييب القسري على عهد النظام، ستمضي في استعادة عافيتها ومكانتها في تقديم نموذج وطني يليق بحضارتها ويستحقه شعبها لتبهر العالم من جديد. شكرا.
Thank you, and congratulations to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. And what a beautiful and powerful analogy and metaphor. Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Council today. We highly appreciate your contributions toward a more stable and secure Syria and region. I would also like to thank Deputy Special Envoy Claude Cordon and Assistant Secretary General Ms. Misuya and Ms. Mardini for their comprehensive briefings and testaments. Mr. President, since the start of the year, the situation on the ground in Syria has evolved swiftly and in a meaningful manner. Progress across the security, political, and economic spheres indicates a shift toward a more hopeful and constructive path. Integration process in Syria should continue uninterrupted, irrespective of regional developments. At the same time, unrealistic expectations should be avoided. In this regard, bringing all segments of Syrian society together around the government through an inclusive approach and accelerating reconstruction efforts remain critical priorities. Turkey encourages the Syrian government to further enhance inclusiveness in the political process so as to fully reflect Syria's diversity. We note with appreciation the comprehensive approach adopted by the Syrian government to engage different segments of society and to develop mechanisms of accountability with a view to ensuring respect for human rights, including the work of Syria's National Investigation Committee. There is a clear window of opportunity to achieve lasting stability in Syria. This opportunity must be seized through sustained and constructive engagement with the Syrian government. The listing of Nusra Front and HTS from the UN sanctions regime has constituted an important step towards supporting the international legitimacy of the Syrian government. Mr. President, recent developments in our region risk generating further instability both regionally and beyond. It is therefore essential to keep Syria insulated from these tensions as the country needs to consolidate its efforts towards stability, security, and economic recovery. We commend the Syrian government for its efforts to keep the country away from the regional escalation. These efforts deserve the full support of the international community, especially this Council. Following recent Israeli attacks on Lebanon, more than 1 million people have been internally displaced and over 100,000, predominantly Syrians, have crossed the border and sought refuge in Syria. Similar one had happened in 2006. In the face of this large-scale population movement, it is of utmost importance that the UN entities, in particular UNHCR and OCHA, continue to provide necessary support to the Syrian government. This in turn requires adequate and sustained funding of the humanitarian response plan. At the same time, the threat posed by Daesh must be closely monitored in this period of heightened instability. We must not allow the current environment to provide an opportunity for its re-emergence. In this regard, the Syrian government, as a member of the global coalition against Daesh, ISIL, should be supported in strengthening its counter-terrorism capacity. Turkey has also contributed to these efforts, including through recent actions to dismantle dangerous Daesh cells. Mr. President, stability in southern Syria must be ensured in full compliance with the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement. In this context, we reiterate our call for Israel's withdrawal from the buffer zone and from the areas it has occupied since 8 December. Respect for Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity remain indispensable. Mr. President, Turkey will continue to act as a constructive partner for all those committed to supporting stability, security, reconciliation, and sustainable economic recovery in Syria. Mr. President, beyond these written talking points, let me add something on the anniversary of the start of the revolution upon Syria's representative's remarks. As a Turkish diplomat who served in Syria twice during Bashar Assad time, I am aware of the factors led to this revolution, losing hope from the unfulfilled promises of the regime. Certainly, the conflict impacted first Syria and Syrian people. They suffered more than everybody else. But secondly, my country was impacted very much, country-wise and people-wise. Last week, on the occasion of awarding Secretary General Atatürk International Peace Prize in Ankara by President Erdogan, I accompanied Secretary General in his visit to the Migration Agency in Ankara, talking to the migrants, Syrian migrants who are waiting for the processes, like Yusra and And we met together with the civil society organizations who helped UNHCR during all these conflict years. We saw firsthand, of course, their appreciation to my country, but more than that, we saw hope for the future of their country, for the future of their families and children. So Syrian revolution is there. Now Syria deserves our full support for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative of Turkey. I think the threads of Turkey are well established in the blockade of Syria. Thank you. Now we'll hear from the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. We express our deep appreciation for the able manner with which you have presided over the Security Council during this month. At the outset, the Arab Group reaffirms its commitment to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, which is facing a critical chapter in its history as a result of successive crises due to the repercussions of the war, economic collapse, and ongoing regional developments. As the Syrian government is seeking to resolve these successive crises, it requires concerted, sincere efforts to distance Syria from any disputes, conflicts, or endeavors to impose foreign agendas that would drag Syria back to previous cycles of violence, crisis with unforeseen consequences. Mr. President, the Arab Group values the steps taken by the Syrian government to advance comprehensive political track, and we reaffirm that the of the international community to support these efforts as a necessary moral and political obligation towards the brotherly people of Syria. We also commend the steps taken towards the implementation of the agreement signed between the Syrian government and the SDF to enable the Syrian state to extend its control across northeast Syria. We also urge all the components of the Syrian people to engage in a constructive and sincere manner in the efforts to rebuild national institutions and to confront any plans to destabilize Syria and undermine its territorial integrity. Mr. President, despite what was achieved on the ground, the security situation in Syria remains volatile in light of tensions in the region and as a result of ongoing activities and challenges imposed by terrorist groups, particularly Daesh. The Arab Group stresses that counterterrorism is a collective action and cannot take place without addressing the root causes. A security solution remains incomplete unless the living conditions of the Syrian people improve. In this regard, we commend the efforts taken to strengthen investment opportunities in Syria, and we call on economic actors and countries to contribute to economic recovery and early recovery projects to rebuild Syria and create favorable conditions that would enable IDPs and refugees to return to their homes in dignity and to instill hope in the Syrian people for a better future. In this regard, the Arab Group values the vital role of countries hosting Syrian refugees and we call on the international community to strengthen and expand the scope of support to these countries that cannot alone bear this responsibility. Mr. President, Israel, the occupying power, continues its acts of aggression against Syrian territory in a clear and blatant violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement and relevant Security Council resolutions, notably resolutions 242, 338, and 497. The Arab group holds the Israeli occupier responsible for any escalation, and we call on the Security Council to shoulder its full responsibilities and contain these violations and compel the Israeli occupier to end its attacks, to respect the sovereignty of Syria, and to fully withdraw from the occupied Syrian Arab Golan. Mr. President, in conclusion, the Arab group reaffirms the legal and historic responsibility of this council towards Syria, whether in accompanying the political track or in guaranteeing the unity of its territory and its territorial integrity, and to work on the full implementation of Security Council resolutions. This council cannot be spared its responsibility. It must shoulder its responsibility fully pursuant to the Charter and to ensure that the principles of justice and peace prevail. I thank you.
Thank you to the representative of Algeria. And I think that concludes our scheduled presenters. If there's anybody we've missed or any additional comments. Otherwise, I would like to conclude with my personal thanks. First to Ambassador Waltz for allowing me to do a hostile takeover of this chair, to be with you for these 2 hours. And leave you with one thought. I thought it was such a beautiful metaphor that the ambassador presented on brocade. But the thought that was in my mind is what allows him to present it is the frame, the 4 corners of that frame for the vertical and horizontal weaving. And that's really all of you. So on behalf of the President, Ambassador Waltz, and myself, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here. The meeting is adjourned. Do I get to keep this, by the way?